Our lesson this morning is the foolish hearts. Now I know that may not fit exactly the way that our series has been going, because we've been talking about the benefits of the resurrection of Jesus, having Easter just passed, and what it means to us and ramifications in our life and blessings that we have because of it. And today we're going to look at a different angle. It is the same lesson, but it comes from a different angle. And of course, you know, if you're going to talk about foolishness, you've got to start with Psalms chapter 14, verse 1, where the Bible says, "The fool hath said in his heart, there is no God." Now, I went to the dictionary and I pulled a definition of fool. It says, acting without wisdom or understanding. And in this outline up here that you see, I have added in spiritual matters because I want it to be spiritually speaking, not just in worldly things. If you boil that verse down, the fool that said in his heart, there is no God, it is disbelief in God. Disbelief. But I'm going to stretch that imagination just a little bit today, because I'm going to say it is living as though there were no God. And you can even be a Christian and at times in your life live as though there's no God. All of us do that, I suppose. At least I'm guilty. And I confess to you this morning that I have to catch myself all the time and say, that is not Christ-like. That's not the right attitude. That's not the way you should be doing it. That's not the example you should show. And on again. Lord, help me. I do that more than I can even think. So we're going to really begin with characteristics of fools. In 1 Samuel chapter 25 and verse 25, a girl by the name of Abigail comes to David, and she said, "Please pay no attention to my Lord, to that wicked man Nabal. He is just like his name, and folly goes with him." And you're saying, what does that have to do with anything? Well, Nabal means fool. That's the first thing you need to know. Nabal is a fool. And to the story of Abigail and Nabal, Abigail is Nabal's wife. Now, David has been running from Saul, and he comes along, he sees Nabal's shepherds out in the field with his sheep. And so David puts some of his men around to protect Nabal's sheep. Well, after some time, David decides Nabal needs to be giving me some help here. I need some food for my men. I need some provision. So he sends an entourage to Nabal, who is rich and powerful. And he says, "My Lord David wants some food." And Nabal says, "Who is David that I should listen to him?" And he throws all kinds of insults toward David. So David, the entourage goes back to David, tells him what Nabal said, and David says to the effect, "Mount up, guys. There's not a man going to live in that house. Strap on the swords and let's go." And the verse that I read to you, Abigail hears about that, and she gets provision. She puts it on some donkeys, and she goes out to David to meet him. "Spare my house." Don't pay any attention to that fool Nabal. That's really what she was saying. He's just foolish. Nabal was sometimes like me. And he gives some characteristics of being foolish. He was ungrateful for the treatment that David had given to him and his men in protecting what was his. You ever ungrateful? I'm so blessed by God, I can't even begin to count the ways. And I give thanks. I think generally I am grateful, but sometimes I think about, I've done it. It's me. And I think about in the book of Acts, at least twice, Paul goes back to this church at Antioch and he tells them, here's what we did. No, that's not it. He tells them, here is what God has done through us. And I need to learn a lesson on gratitude. Nabal, the fool, is ungrateful. Nabal was rash and he was harsh and he was ungodly. Who is David? And sometimes my wife says, I don't know, my wife says that my voice comes across very negative. It comes across as very strong, very ugly, and very ungodly. She's probably right. She usually is. Lord, help me. Help me. Fool. He was more worried about whether or not David was worthy of him sending the provisions than he was worried about, am I pleasing God? And when somebody looks at us for help, sometimes our attitude is just like Nabal's. Is he worthy of this help? And sometimes it goes along with, I will help you if. There's that parameter that I put around it. And yeah, I know people will take advantage of you, and I know that, sometimes you think, I've just done all I can do for you. And then I think about, God, I need you. God, I need your help. God, I need this thing, this physical thing, or I need this done, or I need this. He never treats me that way. And it's foolish when we are worried about physical things that people are needing rather than showing the love and care and grace of God. Nabal was a Calebite, a descendant of Caleb. Now, if you remember, Caleb was one of the two spies that was sent into the promised land. He gave a good report, and he and Joshua were the only two of that generation that were allowed to go into the promised land. He should have had the background, the training, and the wherewithal to have been a godly kind of person rather than a fool. Go down to Luke chapter 12. Jesus, told them this parable. The ground of a certain rich man yielded an abundant harvest. And he thought to himself, what shall I do? I have no place to store my crops. Then he said, this is what I'll do. Now I have you writing in thought and himself in there because I wanted to hone in on the man's mind. His mind is centered, and you can see it just from this slide, much less what's coming. You can see that it's centered on him. What shall I do? Not what's God going to help me do. Not what does God want me to do. Not what should I do, but what shall I do? I have no place to store my crops. Oh, this is what I'll do. And James says, what we ought to be saying is, if God wills, that's what we'll do. But no, that's not what this man says in this parable. This is what I'll do. I will tear down my barns and build bigger ones. And there I will store my surplus grain. I'll go and put this one up. And I'll say to myself, you have plenty of grain laid up for many years. Take life easy, eat, drink, and be merry. Wow. That is the epitome of our kind of planning as human beings. Let's see, I got this extra grain. I know what I'll do. I'll just tear down the barn. I'll build new ones. I'll have a place to store my grain. Everything's going to be okay. I did it. I planned it. I produced it. And I made it. Sounds like a pretty good human plan, does it not? But Jesus says, but God said unto him, you fool. What? Well, in this little parable here, Jesus is talking about somebody who's putting more emphasis upon the physical things than he is upon the spiritual. He's not thankful, just as Nabal was not thankful. Doesn't have any gratitude. He says, this very night, your life will be demanded from you. And you'll notice I have life and you underlined for you to put into your blanks in the outline. Which is more important, you or your life? What you want to do, or what you have, what you've accomplished, you or the life? That's the choice. And this young man's chosen my stuff. My stuff. Then who's going to get what you have prepared for yourself? This is how it will be with whoever stores up things for themselves, but is not rich toward God. And I'm putting the emphasis here on this. You fool. Your life is going to be required of you. This is how it will be. This is the treatment God will give you. And his advice here is, enrich yourself with God. Don't let anything be more important than God. Don't let anything supplant God out of your life. Because if you do, Jesus has called you a fool. You fool. So let's get some lessons from biblical fools. In Matthew chapter 25, verses 1 through 13, we have what's called the parable of the foolish virgins, the wise and foolish virgins. There are 10 of them in this situation. They are members of a wedding party. Now, you don't get from this story what really is going on here. Do you remember Joseph and Mary were espoused to be married? And yet Joseph is called the husband and Mary is called the wife in the story? Well, here's how that goes down. They had already said their marriage vows, but they had not signed the marriage contract. We would say license. Between the time they make their marriage vows one to another and they sign the marriage contract at the wedding feast, the groom has got to go and fix a place for the bride. He has 1 year to do it in. And during that year, whenever he gets that place prepared for her, he can come back. Now, 5 of those virgins were looking for the groom to come back. 5 of them were not looking for him. It's going to take him a while. He's got a lot to do. He doesn't have the money to fix that this quickly. Don't worry about it. Take a life of ease. And they were doing anything but preparing for the important in that wedding feast. For us, it's the spiritual things of life. Do you remember what Jesus said? I go and prepare a place for you. Do you remember that? And if I go and prepare a place for you, I will come again and receive you unto myself, that where I am, there you may be also. It's the picture of the wedding being completed with the wedding feast and the signing of the contract and the bride going home with the groom. That's what's in this parable. The wise virgins kept their oil lamps trimmed with oil. Did they use it? I'm sure they used those lamps during the night. But what did they do the next day? They filled them back up. The foolish virgins, if they used them, they let it burn out and they did not refill the oil. And the groom came. And that's a picture of me and you, whether or not we're going to be prepared for the Lord to come. Lord, come quickly, John closes the book of Revelation with. Then there's a wise and foolish builder of Luke chapter 6. I looked at that and, the wise man built his house upon the rock. And the foolish man built his house upon the sand. And I thought, that is a good children's vacation Bible school song. And it is. And I've gone over that passage. Y'all know that at the end of my lessons, I always start out with a thing called closure. Where I'm bringing the lesson together and I'm closing it down. You're getting ready to go home. Then you can reach for your song books, that kind of thing. They do that, Ed.
I know.
Well, this parable here, if you want to call it a parable, this children's song at the end is at the end of the Sermon on the Mount. And Jesus is closing down what he said. You've got two choices. One is that you choose what Jesus says and you build your life upon it and you follow it and you do your best to adhere to what Jesus says. This is a wise way to do. The foolish man listens to Jesus and turns and walks off and says, so what? And how many times have I been in a Bible class, heard sermons, and said, so what? What difference does it make to me? And every bit of spirituality is a building block to build who we are. So not listening to Jesus and building your life on the things of the world, Jesus says, that's foolish. Don't you know I'm coming back to get you? Don't you know the things of the world are going to be destroyed? And I'm going to carry you home if you're prepared, if you're ready, if you built upon me. But I'm not carrying you home if you don't. That's foolishness. Proverbs chapter 11 verse 2 says, when pride comes, then comes shame. Some say pride comes before the fall. That kind of thing. Well, God resists the proud, so our brother Peter tells us. And he gives grace unto the humble. And that picture, humility, is the foundation for wisdom. I cannot be wise and think more highly of myself than I ought. Sandra, Donald's statement to me still haunts me. Donald told me one time, you think a lot of your lessons, don't you? That's what he said. And it haunts me. Do I think more of myself than I ought to? Well, at times, probably. Probably. The King James uses lowly here. And it means to bring yourself down on purpose so that you can serve God, because He is God. It means on purpose. I may think I'm doing a pretty good job of this, that, or another, but man, Lord, it's only because of you. Not you all, because of Him. God. The Apostle Paul was sent out from the church at Antioch on 3 missionary journeys. And in the book of Acts, when he came back, do you know what he said? Let me tell y'all what I did. No, that's not what he said. He said, let me tell you what God did through us. And there's the proper attitude. Humility. And I'm applying it this morning to say that if I can't humble myself, I'm a fool. So now here comes the end of the sermon, okay? Here comes your closure. You are here today. We're missing a few of our members, but those of you who are here, you're here today. Thank you for being here today. Thank you from Jesus, not me. And you're not fools. Because you're preparing. You're staying with the Lord. You believe in the God of the Bible. You believe what it says about Him. You believe that there is an eternity out there. And you know that this earth is temporary. And you know Jesus is coming again. And you're not like the foolish virgins. But you're tying yourself to Him. And you know the judgment is ahead of us. And you know that the judgment is going to be good stuff. Come on in here. You have been faithful. Yeah, it's going to be good stuff. You know that nothing is worth losing your reward with God, because it's eternally in heaven. You know what's coming. And now there's not a foolish heart in any faithful Christian, because you know God is real. So wisdom is seeking God's guidance. James 1:5. Any of you lack wisdom? Ask God. He gives it liberally unto all men, not just to Christians. He will give even an atheist wisdom to all men. He says, walk in God's light. 1 John 1. Scott, I thought you did an outstanding job teaching 1 John on Wednesday night when you had it. I just think so often about those lessons that you presented, and one of them is walking in the light. God gives light. He is light. And when you walk with Him, you know what's real. And then He says, wisdom is being transformed. I beg you, Paul says. Incidentally, I've come to the conclusion that chapter 12 of Romans is what he's really writing about. And everything else is to lead up to it and get you ready to receive it. I beg you, give yourself over or present your bodies a living sacrifice, holy and acceptable unto God, which is your reasonable service or your personal worship. Then he says, and be transformed. Don't be conformed to the world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. And that's what worship is about. That's what Bible reading is about. That's what prayer is about. That is God's will for you. Don't be a fool. Foolish hearts. Lord, get it out of all of us. Amen.
Amen.